today or who you associate with. I am the Reverend Suzanne Parker Miller. I'm the founder and director of Pastors for North Carolina Children, and I'll be one of your presenters today. And so we are really excited that you're here and appreciate your patience as we continue to admit folks in. Can everybody see the screen that says welcome? Getting some feedback. Okay. If you would mute your screen, for those of you that are on, if you would mute for us so that we'll have a clean recording of the show or the presentation, that would be great. And I'm going to turn it over. As you continue to put your information in the chat, I want to just introduce our presenters today. Reverend Mary Elizabeth Hanchey is on here. Mary Elizabeth, you want to say hello?
Good morning.
And also President Simone Kiddo. I think I pronounced that correctly.
Kiddo, like kid
Kiddo,
and morning dew. That's okay.
Glad that you're here. She's president with Durham Association of Educators. And our seminary intern from Pastors for North Carolina Children, Annalise. You want to say hello? Von Sprecken?
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all.
She's from Duke Divinity School and working with Pastors for North Carolina Children this year. And then last but certainly not least is Durham Congregations in Action, Reverend Breana Van Velzen. And I think Brianna's
Hi, everyone.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
hi all. I'm your Zoom coordinator today. We're happy to hold this space with you and hope we can find out more today about what's happening with DPS and at the state level. So thank you all.
We will continue to admit folks, and I'm going to turn the meeting over to Simone.
Hi, everybody. I am Simone Kiddo. I'm currently serving as the president of the Durham Association of Educators. By trade, I am a school social worker. I'm a last school social worker at Club Boulevard Elementary. I am also the person who headed up Team Food, which is the last interaction that I had with you all back in good gracious, don't know when, around May 16th when there was a statewide day of action. And we made sure kids had food. And I am talking about what in the world is going on with Durham Public Schools right now. So for a little bit of context, last year, the school district and the school board completed a salary study for classified staff. And the salary study was an attempt to try to match classified staff at the market rate for their positions. So there is a consulting firm that would evaluate how much it costs, how much a custodian gets paid for Durham Public Schools in comparison to a comparable position in other public sector or in private sector work. And so the intention of the salary study was actually to try to balance out and make the DPS a competitive place to work. And in the execution of that salary study, there were, we'll call them missteps. I think there's part of the biggest concern that folks have had has been this past people's paychecks, has been not having a lot of information about what happened, getting certain information one week and getting a different story the next week. And so we are hoping that one of the things that comes out here soon is an actual detailed report about what happened from the time of that salary study to its execution in October. So in October, after the state finally passed their own budget, our school district could start to implement any changes that they had made once they started receiving state monies. So in October, classified staff members started to receive a raise. So everybody, those classified staff members got a state 4% raise across the board. And then there were folks that got a raise based off of that comparison of the market rate for classified employees starting in October. So there was a change in salary in October and then also back pay for September and August and sometimes July, depending on the classification of employee. Folks got paid in October. Folks reflected feeling like the DPS was finally recognizing how valuable they are as an employee through their pay. And folks chugged along October, November, and December. And then in January, right before MLK weekend, folks were started receiving letters or emails from central office that there was an error placing them on their salary step. So the way in which public school employees are paid is based off of steps, which is most often equated to a set of years of experience. And so for Durham, the thing that has made Durham fairly compatible, or people like working for Durham, is that they would consider both state experience. And so what public school experience do you have in North Carolina, or what state experience do you have in North Carolina, but also private experience. So there's a lot of folks that came into Durham Public Schools having worked for like a private daycare, for example, and that experience was being counted in terms of your raises and pay. What was revealed, or what we have mostly been able to deduce, right, because a lot of the information has not really come out, is that there were two recommendations before the execution, that there was a way that DPS could enact the raises that would continue to consider folks' like out-of-state and private experience, and a version where they could not consider that private and out-of-state experience and only consider their state experience. The communication that folks have looked back on from the execution of the October pay is that the district was claiming to intend to continue out-of-state and private experience. And the request that the district made of the county for the funds for the budget to be able to like carry out the entire year would not sustain that money. They did not have the budget to be able to continue on paying those raises based off of private and out-of-state experience. So what was potentially going to happen is there was these 1,300 classified employees. Yeah, so Lynn is dropping in the chat, at 31 steps, now down to a 17. There's folks who had years and years of very relevant and required experience that for a lot of folks feels like is now being just ignored by the district, being told that their life experience doesn't matter. There's folks who would not have their jobs without that experience that is now, essentially being threatened to not count anymore. So there's 1,300 classified employees that this has directly impacted. And what was on the slate was that their checks in January were going to start being a whole lot less than they were before. So they would be reset to the 4% raise that they got from the state. And they were cutting the raises that had come from that out-of-state and private experience. There was also a concern that because the district takes in a lot of funding sources, one of them being state monies, there is a state law that says if there is a overpayment, that the district or the entity that uses state funds must make efforts to claw that money back and recoup that money. Our argument was that this was not an overpayment. You told people they were going to get paid a certain amount in October, and then you paid them that amount. And so that's not an overpayment. That is somebody getting the wages they were promised. So our folks, the folks of Durham Association of Educators, which is the local public school union, which represents both classified and certified folks, classified folks being instructional assistants, custodians, bus drivers, mechanics, a lot of folks at central office, data managers, the folks that make our schools run. We represent both certified and classified folks. Certified folks are people like classroom teachers, school social workers like myself, principals. We started having conversations with folks in our base, and it felt deeply important for us to address the immediate need of making sure folks did not have to pay that money back, and to have January checks remain whole. So we launched our campaign almost immediately to apply pressure to have the school board vote to not have clawbacks and to keep those January checks whole. The timing of it was really unfortunate because they sent out the letters and payroll was almost going to be immediately due. But the board did make a promise that they would fix those January checks. And they did promise and then vote for no clawbacks. But the question was still going to be up in the air about what was going to happen moving forward. People made very serious life changes based off of the money that they started receiving in October. Folks quit second and third jobs, purchased homes, moved, bought cars, and they weren't going to be able to take the oops, I'm sorry to the bank to pay their mortgage. And so we needed to find an answer for these 1,300 classified folks immediately. We also needed an answer and a resolution for what was happening for folks' steps and years of experience. Like I said, a lot of folks felt like their life and all that they had worked for was irrelevant now to the district. And people felt really disrespected and feel really distrustful of district administration. So we continued organizing with our folks to continue to push for folks' pay and to continue to push around steps. And we continued pushing around this kind of model or concept that we have been moving with our folks for actually several weeks, several months now, which is called Meet and Confer. So because of the Jim Crow white supremacist law that bans collective bargaining for public sector workers in North Carolina, as public sector workers, we don't have a formal method to be able to negotiate about working conditions. And other places across the country that have bans on collective bargaining, but also other places in Durham, like Durham city workers, have a process that's called Meet and Confer, which is an agreement with the school board and district administration that allows workers through the union to be able to negotiate working and learning conditions. So we had launched a campaign back in August to try to win that, and it felt very relevant in this moment when district administration and when the school board were making what felt like very unilateral decisions about people's working conditions, for us to have a seat at the table to be able to help, to be able to guide how those decisions are being made and to make sure there's worker input when we're talking about folks' livelihood. So we continued around those demands, respecting folks' pay, respecting their years of experience, and respecting our union. And there have been a number of board meetings since then. It feels like we all kind of now live at Staff Development Center, which is where a lot of those board meetings are held. And where folks are currently is there's a demand on the table for February checks to remain whole while district administration and the school board figure out what is happening with the finances. It's been very apparent in the back and forth between the school board members and district administration that school board members do not have the clarity that they need about what's going on with the district's budget. But while they figure that out, people have bills that they need to pay. And so the demand right now is keeping those February checks whole while they have a chance to figure out what to do about March, April, May, and June and moving forward. Having some answers to folks' like second January check. So the way that they resolved the January check was to send a supplemental check. And a lot of folks were expecting to get $350 and ended up with $10. And so again, there's a lack of communication about what people should anticipate. And folks already feel pretty distrustful about anything coming from the district. So they need to have some communication about what is going on with that. And to be able to take the next steps with this Meet and Confer seat at the table policy. We heard them add it to the agenda on the board meeting. They took some action to try to bring workers to the table about decisions being made. And we just want to make sure that that actually happens and doesn't end up getting kind of kicked down the road and getting pushed off into a different committee. In order to apply some pressure, folks have been taking what we've called days of protest and escalation around our sets of demands. And so yesterday was the second day of protest where there were 7 schools that came to the Fuller Building, which is a central services building, and participated in a picket. There were school staff, parents, community members, caregivers. The Durham community has been out on these picket lines both yesterday and the week before, to try to push around more transparency within the district about working and learning conditions. And the next step is there's a board meeting tomorrow that is both closed and open session around personnel matters, and another board meeting on Thursday where we anticipate them making, that is their deadline around our 3 demands. So there will be discussion on that as well.
And can you just restate for us the 3 demands that you all are placing just very quickly?
Yep.
Make sure we're all clear on that.
Keeping February checks whole, so no cuts to February pay. Having a answer to why January checks appeared incorrect or not as how people expected them to look. And scheduling the meet and confer work session, which is what they agreed to at that last board meeting, scheduling that work session by February 16th. So having that session by the 16th. We've seen some movement already on 2 of the demands. They've started to communicate out what they anticipate is the reason for January paychecks, and they've asked folks to like have those paychecks sent into the board so that they can have a fuller picture. And there has been attempts to schedule that meeting. The union has gotten notification from the board's administrative assistant, like a scheduler, to try to make that happen. So we're awaiting to see what the final, how it kind of plays out by Thursday.
Okay. Thank you for that. If you have questions, we invite you to put those in the chat. We'll be coming back to those at the end. Have some time to answer questions and have further conversation. Also, just wanted to say, if you haven't introduced yourself in the chat yet, we invite you to do that. Tell us who you are, what faith community or organization you're with, your connection to DPS if you have one. So we would love to know who all is here. We're so excited about the turnout today for this webinar. And we are recording it and we'll be sharing that back out with you along with the slides. I'm going to transition now into talking about Pastors for North Carolina Children and our role in statewide advocacy and how this is connected to a lot of what we're seeing happen in Durham, and how in many ways this is not, this is part of a larger problem. So Pastors for North Carolina Children is an organization working statewide. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization. Oops. And I want to just have you put in the chat as well, how many of you have, or what is your familiarity with Leandro? How many of you have heard of the word Leandro? You know what that means if I say the Leandro case. 1, you've never heard of it. You don't know what that word means. 5, you could do a presentation on it. You know, where are you in that? If you would just pop your numbers in the chat, that's helpful for us to kind of know where folks are. It looks like we have folks all over the board, even a 0 in there. Okay. So a lot of 3s, a lot of 1s. Awesome. And Brittany, I saw your 5. If you want to jump in at any point, let me know. One of my colleagues, she could do this presentation as well. So Pastors for North Carolina Children, as I said, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit, independent ministry. We're mobilizing faith communities to advocate for public ed. So we work statewide. And so, you know, not experts on what's happening in DPS right now, which is why we wanted Simone on here to be able to talk about that. But also, you know, trying to help bring a broader picture to this whole conversation. What is happening in Durham is symptomatic of what's happening in a lot of different districts. I mean, granted, not all of them are having this payroll issue right this moment, but the lack of funding is a common thread across the entire 115 districts in North Carolina. One of the reasons that pay is a problem right now is that there's just not enough teachers. We know that the increase in numbers of vacancies just continues month after month. Normally you see a drop middle of the year for vacancies, and we are not seeing that. Last year we didn't see it. It has continued this year. As you can see here, the numbers just continue to climb. We don't have enough adults in the buildings. We do not have enough adults to care for the children. And those positions need to be filled. And so one of the ways districts are trying to do that is to increase spending, increase salaries, to attract more workers to serve in these positions, the teaching positions, the classified positions, all of the bus drivers. I mean, all of these different positions. And so one of the things that we're seeing, though, is that not only are the positions in our schools currently declining, and more and more vacancies increasing, we are seeing a dramatic drop in the number of children not children, but teens, college students who are going into education. Less and less students are joining into our state's colleges of education, which is the vast majority of where our new teachers come from. So not only are the schools not having enough adults, the pipeline to fill those vacancies is also rapidly declining. This is a real concern. When we think about funding at the state level, and if you're not originally from North Carolina, this may be a very different concept than a lot of other states. The state budget for education is the largest single expenditure that North Carolina spends within our state budget. This past budget season, it was $13.5 billion. It's about 40% of the total state budget that goes to education. But when we think about that number, and yes, that number has continued to increase because we're educating more children and having more students in our schools, the problem is the funding has not kept up with this pace of growth. And so we see here the budget amounts have not really changed dramatically since they dropped in 2008-09 with the Great Recession. We were at 37% of the state budget at that point, and now we're only at 39%. And yet we know our state is dramatically growing. In North Carolina, our schools are primarily funded from state funds. 64% of the funding for DPS and all the other districts comes from our state. Local funding is about a quarter, 25%, and then federal funding is only about 10%. That covers IDEA, which is your Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, your school breakfast and lunch program, your career and technical education classes, and Title I, which are schools who have high levels of poverty. So those are only the things that feds cover. The local covers your local supplements, which is part of what we're talking about here with Durham. They also are covering the buildings and the buses and those infrastructure things like your HVAC systems. Those types of things are what the local county commissioners and school board are supposed to cover. Everything else that the state needs to operate our schools, all of those salaries and materials are supposed to be funded by the state. And that is the way North Carolina has things set. It's been like that for decades, and this is unusual compared to most states. Most states, schools are primarily funded through local property taxes. That's not in North Carolina. So when we look at this is just it's a hard graph to see, but what it's showing is that when we account for the growth of our state and the increases that it costs to educate children, we're seeing a 6% decrease, even though they continue to spend more on education. As you'll hear in a lot of ads, we're spending more than we ever have on education. Yes, we're educating more children, though, and that costs more. The reality is when we look at inflation as well, we are spending about 10% less than we were in 2008. So we're decreasing our amount of spending for North Carolina for education. We are 50th in the country in the amount of education funding that we can put forward as a state. The funding effort, from what I understand from economists that I work with, is that funding effort shows the apples to apples comparison state to state, because it takes our gross domestic product as a state and compares it to our education spending. North Carolina is last. We can spend more. We have more available to spend as a state, and we are not choosing to do that. And that for me is absolutely unconscionable. It is immoral that we are not putting forward more. As you see in this chart briefly, the amount that we're spending per student, per pupil, is also basically stagnant, if not falling just a little bit. It is not increasing dramatically. It's $17 more than it was last year at this time. And all of this is not taking into account the building needs that we know so many schools are having. There's a need for, tremendous amount of spending on buildings across the state to get them up to standard levels, to meet the growth needs, to, revitalize buildings that are in need of, new roofs and new floors and things like that to keep them healthy for our children. So the Leandro case, all of that brings us to this court case that was filed, it's now 30 years ago, 1994. It was filed by these 5 original counties, Halifax, Hope, Cumberland, Robeson, and Vance. These Eastern North Carolina counties are very rural and they're very impoverished. There's generational wealth that's just been denied these counties for decades, centuries now. And so they sued the state of North Carolina because the state of North Carolina Constitution that was written in 1868 after the Civil War, when we were going to re-enter the Union, the Constitution says that students are supposed to receive, the wording of the case is, a sound basic education. And so these counties sued to say this is not the case. You're not funding our students and our schools enough. And so they sued the state. This case has now been going on 30 years. We are in the basement here. You can see the current level is here in the basement. And we are trying to get to the minimum level that the state constitution requires. We are not striving for a world-class education. We are just trying to get to the bare minimum, the absolute minimum of what our students deserve. And so Pastors for North Carolina Children works closely with the Every Child North Carolina Coalition. I have some coalition partners here on the call as well. Glad you're here. And we are working collectively across the state to help raise the awareness of the Leandro case and the need for the full funding of our public education system. The thing I like about Leandro, one of the things I like, is that it focuses on our 6 most vulnerable children's groups. It focuses because we know if these children get what they need, then all children will receive what they need. So this is a way to make sure that every child is getting what they deserve and need to be educated. They focus on children without access to early childhood, so your pre-K children, your children who are subject to racial discrimination, so our Black, Hispanic, Latinx, and Indigenous children, our children who have disabilities, whether those are physical, emotional, or learning disabilities, our children who are experiencing economic disadvantage or come from poor families with low wealth, our children living in rural districts or rural areas of the state, and then our children who are learning English. And so, a lot of those intersect as well to affect our children, to ensure that they're not receiving that equitable educational opportunities. And that's why we need to fight to make sure all children are getting what they need. These are the 8 recommendations from the case. I'm not going to go through this, but the courts have approved the comprehensive remedial plan that is to get us to the basic funding level over an 8-year span. Now, when we get to that 8 years, end of the 8-year plan to get us to full funding, the state spending on education would need to increase by $3.7 billion. That sounds like a lot, but it's the step-up plan. So each year it would increase just a little bit to help us get there. And like I said, the funding is available. The state has the money. It's just choosing not to spend it. And then when you look at Durham specifically, Durham County Public Schools would be receiving $70.6 million a year annually. That's not a one-time amount. That is an annual amount that the state is not paying to DPS. I want to just stop right there because that is a huge amount of money. Simone, what would 70 million a year do for the Durham Public Schools? I mean, what would that help fund?
Yeah, I mean, I think folks have thrown around a lot of like budget numbers, particularly around this like classified pay issue. And I think to get folks just where they were when they felt like the district started appreciating them as employees is a drop in the bucket compared to 70 million. And so that retains and attracts really high quality staff to be able to meet our students' needs. I think it frees up particular monies that can only then be used for like capital expenses. Like our buildings, like you said, are kind of crumbling. And students deserve to be in a space every single day that has 4 sound walls as a bare minimum. I think it frees up. I know there's a lot of conversation about our child nutrition services, and I think there's ways in which our child nutrition staff are incredibly creative and have a lot of really amazing ideas of how to give kids high quality good food. And yeah, I mean, 70 million would change the game.
It would. And this is it's a 32% increase in the budget. And that is happening in every county across the state. This is not just something that Durham is experiencing. This is a problem in every single county, all 100 counties in our state, all 115 districts. And so if we have the money and we need to spend the money, and we can do it without even raising taxes, which is the thing. There's no need to even raise taxes in North Carolina. If we just don't cut the corporate tax rate to 0, which is what they're doing at the moment, we could actually afford this very easily. And so, like I've said, it doesn't make sense to me why we would not want to invest in our children and their future and invest in our communities. As people of faith, it is very important that we love our neighbor. It's one of our 2 greatest commandments. And loving our neighbor includes making sure our children have a safe education a space and a sound education. That is the best way to move children out of poverty and to ensure that they have what they need to flourish. That is what we're called to do as people of faith. And so this to me is just a really, really important piece of it. So where are we with Leandro? Basically, the General Assembly didn't fund year 1. They didn't fully fund year 2. Year 3 ended on June 30th. They have not fully funded year 3. Years 2 and 3 went back to court in November a year ago, and the judge said they must fund years 2 and 3. Now, the legislature has said they refuse. And so we're at basically an impasse. We went to the controller, trying to get the controller and the governor's office and the attorney general's office to try to force that funding to happen. That did not happen. And so as of October, they said the North Carolina Supreme Court is going to rehear the case. Now, the problem with this is that last November, they issued the ruling on November 5th of 2022. And then the court changed the makeup of the court in the election the next week. And so the facts of the case have not changed. The details of the Leandro case are the same that they have been for 30 years. The only thing that has now changed is the makeup of the court. And so the legislature and the courts are going back in to rehear this case around the funding for years 2 and 3. That is happening on February 22nd. So all of you on this call, we need you to join us in Raleigh on February 22nd. Our coalition is going to be having a day of action for every child for educational rights. We're going to be having a car caravan. We're going to be having a rally outside the legislature on the Capitol grounds. or outside, excuse me, outside the Supreme Court on the Capitol grounds. We're going to be marching across from the Capitol to the legislature and having a press conference. And then we're going to be coming back to Edenton Street United Methodist, where my office is here. We're going to be upstairs in Kerr Hall to have lunch and a teach-in around the connections with civil rights and Brown versus Board of Education, which is having an anniversary this year, and the Leandro case that's having an anniversary this year, and how all of these things are connected together, and why we need to really be paying attention to this, especially here in Black History Month. So we really hope that you'll plan to join us for this big important date on the 22nd and be raising the awareness of people to pay attention to this. The constitutional scholars don't understand why it's going back, because it's a constitutionally decided issue. The only thing that's changed is the makeup of the court, which is not a reason to go back and rehear a case. So I don't want to spend any time on these figures. We'll send out the presentation so you can look at it, but they are literally cutting funding to schools. They have been, but this year we actually saw the decrease in the percentages. And here's the conference budget is the final budget that was passed. It only funds 7% of year 4 for the plan and 3.8% of year 5. And this is a constitutionally mandated spending for the legislature. And they are saying the courts can't tell us what to do. We're not going to do it. They are spending money on these opportunity scholarships or vouchers to send public money, tax money to private schools. That is increasing dramatically. And so this is where the money is going. For those who want to know why we're not spending it on public schools, we're putting it into private. As pastors for North Carolina Children, we believe that, justice is what faith looks like in public. This is a justice issue. This is an advocacy need. And so many faith communities do such great work around supplying our kids, like this week, with food to make sure that they're getting their food, to get their school supplies, all of these things that need to happen that are meeting immediate needs, and they are really important. But we know that this will never change unless we are fixing the system. We have to change the system. And so what we have put forward is a program called Mission Amplify. And today I'd like to introduce it to you and invite you to learn more about it. We'll be having training sessions next week on the 13th at 7 p.m. and on the 15th at 10 a.m. I'll send all the links out for that as well. But it is a program to get people in your congregations writing postcards to be able to tell legislators what you need to support our vulnerable children. So we are helping to make this easy and to make this doable for congregations. We want you to start writing postcards, because for so many congregations, that's a scary thought to do any type of advocacy. So we want to make it easy to say, okay, you don't want to call people yet. You don't want to come to Raleigh yet. Let's write postcards to legislators. Let's learn about the issues ourselves. And then that helps to continue to build our understanding of the issues and our engagement, so that maybe once we've done that, we can make phone calls, or we can visit with legislators in their offices in our districts, or then coming to Raleigh, to meet with legislators here in the Capitol. These are what some of the postcards look like. And we just are looking to help spread this message. And I want to give Simone a moment to help us also know if there's things that congregations can do this week to help with the mess.
I think Mary Elizabeth put a version in the chat, but there are going to be walk-ins at a number of schools on Wednesday. And so the word of the week for a lot of folks has been walkouts, although we have never officially called them a walkout. They are days of protest. And a walk-in is a different kind of concept that shows a lot of community and unity, where folks at the school, both staff members, but also students and community members, gather at the start of the school day and walk in together as a celebration of the school, as a tool for kind of bringing folks together. And so there's a number of places, a number of schools that are doing walk-ins this week. And what I think Mary Elizabeth, you put in the chat for Jordan's, I think is right. I'm trying to scroll back up through the chat. There have been a lot of awesome questions. Yeah, so Jordan is holding theirs Wednesday morning. If you have a child in an elementary school,
I
so
just put it
sorry,
there
that's early.
again so that it's at the bottom of the chat.
Yeah, so there's a number of schools that are doing walk-ins this week. And I'm actually getting live updates of who those places are. So I'll let you know. Sandy Ridge is doing a walk-in this week. Southern is doing a walk-in. Pearson Town, Jordan, Southwest, Brogdon, Rogers Her, EK Poe, DSA, Northern, Lakewood, Bethesda, Boarhead, Merrick Moore. Any corner of the district, you can probably find a walk-in happening on Wednesday morning. And that is a great opportunity to get connected to folks who are in the school and show some support. And then turning up at the board meetings is always really helpful, just to have folks kind of standing in witness and in support.
We have just a few minutes. We want to invite questions. If Mary Elizabeth, if you have questions in the chat that we can address, or for either Simone or myself, or Breana with DCIA.
The questions I've gathered so far are the pre-K staff a part of this number? Are the students going to have to make up the days? What was the time on February 22nd? And there was another one. I'll go back and find it.
Okay. Simone, I'll let you address the DPS ones.
So there's not one whole category of classified staff member that was only impacted. So it just kind of depends on what their years of experience was like in relation to that classified salary study. So there's certainly folks that work in pre-K in a classified position that might have been impacted. The only classified positions that were left out of that classified salary study were bus drivers, because their salary was adjusted in a different form. Not really sure why. So bus drivers are the only ones that were not impacted, but there's not a whole. It's not like all instructional assistants were all impacted. It's just depends on their steps and experience. The other one was, forgot it. What was the second one, Mary Elizabeth?
Will the students make up the days?
No,
Will
it's
they
not a
be
district
required to make up
closure.
the days?
Yeah, it's not a district closure. And even when they have a district closure, there are days in the calendar that are a cushion for that kind of closure. So we have not gotten any communication that they're going to attempt to make students make up those days, but generally no. When a school itself is closed, they don't make up the days. Why are they taking Durham steps in other counties? It was a Durham-based decision. And so Durham in itself was the one that did the classified salary study. They get to determine how they what types of years of experience they consider and they don't. And so other counties could change their practices related to considering years of experience, but that would probably cause a lot of concern.
Hopefully they've seen the mess that has been created and won't try to mess with other counties. And
Hey,
then
Suzanne.
yes.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say the questions about the 22nd. So on February 22nd, it's a Thursday. We're gathering at the Capitol at 10 a.m. The rally is going to start at 10. There's actually going to be a car caravan happening just before that. But 10 a.m. is the start to the rally. That's going to be on the Morgan Street side of the Capitol out front of the Supreme Court. And then we're going to be marching from there about 11:30-ish. Going to be marching from there over to the legislature down Bicentennial Plaza. The press conference is going to be happening about 11:30, 12 o'clock outside the legislature. And then from there, we will be going to Edenton Street, which are all within the block. So it's a very minimal amount of walking, great sidewalks, crosswalks, all that. And Edenton Street's fully handicap accessible if anybody has those needs. And so we'll be having lunch about 12:30. And the teach-in will be happening during and following the lunch. So the events will be wrapping up by 2. So anytime between 10 and 2, if you can only come to part of it, come join us. There's lots of parking along the parking decks that are right there in the middle of the area where we will be, the triangle. And so, we hope that you'll join us, come help us make some noise, raise the volume, help people understand that this is not legally sound, and the court case needs to stand. And it is still, regardless of what happens in the courts, it is still the legislature's job to fund schools fully to ensure equitable educational opportunities for all our kids, which includes making sure we have enough staff and people in the buildings to serve our children. That is so critically important. And we just need to make sure that teachers can teach because they have enough counselors and social workers to deal with the problems that the kids are experiencing, mental health challenges, all of these different things. We need enough bus drivers. We need to get kids to and from school quickly and safely. We need to be sure that our children are getting fed. We need to be sure that they're getting their services for their special needs, their disabilities. All of these things have to happen in order to keep our children safe and healthy and make sure they flourish. So I'm going to get off my soapbox and see if
I'm
there's
going to ask a question, Suzanne.
Yes.
We have the reality is that we know that a lot of our representatives from Durham do support public education. And so there's a question in the chat about how we engage with a statewide plan and statewide work. And I want to say something, and I want to invite you to say something. One of the things that is important in this particular context where we are speaking with people that many of you are clergy or connected to congregations, it's really important for you to also reach out to the denominations that you're a part of and help this kind of advocacy happen in broader contexts. And so there are a lot of ways that we can take this mission amplify into Methodist churches across the region, into Presbyterian churches across the region, into CBF churches across the region. So that's the first thing, is that talk to your colleagues, to the people that you know that are invested in public education in counties across the state, and help Suzanne to connect with them for the specifics of Mission Amplify. So that's one thing. The second is that Mission Amplify does in fact help us to make contact with the legislators across the state and not just ours. And another is that showing up to these kind of days of advocacy actually really matter. I've been a part of them over 2 decades, and sometimes sometimes it's not really on people's minds, and like they come if they can, if they like didn't already have plans for coffee or like whatever. And sometimes people will take off of work and cancel doctor's appointments to come because it seems so important. And I think this is a time to make this a real priority of being present and bringing people with you. Bring people with you from across the state so that there's a visual of how invested people are in this. Those are some answers that I have, and I know that Suzanne can say a little bit more. And Simone, I suspect that you also can talk about our what you're seeing on an organizing level about what we can do for statewide efforts.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Mary Elizabeth. This is a Durham issue, but this is a statewide issue. And so if you have colleagues or clergy groups that you know of that are in other counties beyond Durham, I need to know who they are. If there's ecumenical groups or denominational groups that meet, that have annual meetings or monthly meetings or Zoom meetings or in-person meetings, I am glad to go and be there. I have traveled from one end of the state to the other meeting with clergy groups. I'm going to be in Greenville on Friday and Saturday with the Episcopal Church. I was with the Presbyterians a couple weeks ago. I'm going to be at the Baptist in March. So please, please, please put me in touch with those around the state who can help us get this message out. I do workshops, I do preaching, I do tabling at different events. So we need all of the folks that we can get working together. That is the mission for us, is to, equip and enable congregations to be advocates and to be informed about what's happening.
And also like your cousin or your college roommate or
Exactly.
your whatever, your colleague at work who lives in a different county. This is a time to really do the work of inviting people into something that is critical, and helping to make those connections.
And I just put a couple links in the chat. We have 2 things coming up tomorrow. We have our monthly leaders gathering that we host to just kind of share what's happening and what's going on, give updates. They're real informal. Bring a cup of coffee and join us tomorrow morning at 10. Tomorrow night at 7, the Public Schools First NC, which is one of our partner organizations, our coalition partners, are having constitutional scholars come and speak about the case and what is going on. And you can hear from the lawyers, not from the pastor, about the case and learn a little bit more. I am not a constitutional scholar. I will be the first to tell you that. But they will be able to kind of break down why this is so unprecedented. And then on February 17th, there is another event here in Durham for you all that is with our coalition, Every Child North Carolina, that's going to be at Club Boulevard Elementary that morning from 10 to 12. That would be a great opportunity to invite your friends, your neighbors, your church folks to, to join in with that, to talk more about this. And our intern, Annalise, is working specifically with rural churches this year. Her focus is working with rural churches because we know that often the rural churches are the ones we need to be reaching, most especially to bring legislative change. And so, she's working on that. So if you have contacts for her, please let me know. When we send out the email follow-up with the presentation, we will include contact information, links, emails, everything that you might need to know to be able to empower your folks. Public School Strong is another great organization that we've been working with. I'm glad to see some of your pictures with PSS. They are doing amazing mobilization work. And so, Durham Congregations in Action, I'm so excited to be working with DCIA and, all of these groups that are trying to just spread the message as best we can, as widely as we can. It's necessary. Other questions, other wonderings? Okay. Well, if we don't have other questions, then I think we can.
Excuse me.
Yes.
What date was that again for Club Boulevard?
It's on February 17th. It's Saturday, February 17th from 10 to 12 at Club Boulevard Elementary.
Thank you.
Yep. And there's a link in the chat to register for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And we're going to send out an email with all the links that were put in the chat.
Yes.
Oh, great. That's great. That's great. I work for Durham Public Schools, and I've been affected, and so have my colleagues. I'm a supervisor, and I've had to hold people that were in tears and still try to press through and work. And I'm grateful for this opportunity that you have given us. I'm also a part of Durham Congregations in Action and associate pastor of Emmanuel AME. I worked for Durham Public Schools state for 17 years, but I got my experience from the Angus Barn for 24 years. And I doubt, like you said, they would have hired me if I had not had that on my resume. So I'm grateful for all the work that you're doing and coming together as one. And I'm grateful to be a part of this Zoom, and I will carry the information back to those that weren't able to be on today, especially my church. I am the AME church, and I understand you were given different denominations, but I will take this back to my pastor, and hopefully she will push it up to my presiding elder and our bishop.
That'd be
Thank
great.
you.
We are looking for all the connections that we can get. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you all
And
for
I'll
being
thank
here.
them. Oh, go ahead,
Oh,
Breana.
go ahead, Suzanne.
No.
I was just going to say thank you everyone for being here. We promise we will follow up. Grateful to have so many people from different parts of Durham County, different communities of faith, different organizations here today. Many of you work for DPS or are parents or just concerned citizens, concerned residents. So it means a lot that you took Tuesday morning when you could be doing a lot of other things to learn more about this. If you have further questions, please feel free to email any of us and we'll see who we can direct you to. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Awesome.